Very good evening to all the participants. Welcome, uh, uh, Professor Jatin Srivastava, sir. Uh, Actually, this is the third session of fourth day, we can say, if you see the entire series of faculty development program organized by KIIT School of Mass Communication is the 12th session. And previously in the 3-day sessions, we had our speakers from like Professor Vishwajit Das, Professor G. Ravindran, Dr. Anand Mitra, Arul Aran sir, Professor Vinod Pavala sir, Anjali Mandiru ma'am, and K.P. Jaishankar sir. And yesterday we had Professor Shril Behra and Professor Manisha Pathak and Sundip Mukherjee sir. And in today's session, we had the speakers like Professor Vinod Chatterjee and Archana ma'am. And now we have with us Dr. Jatin Srivastava. And now I would like to request our course coordinator, Dr. Vishwajit Das, to introduce our guest and as well as the team. Handing over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Anurag. Good evening, esteemed speaker and dear participants. I am honored to welcome the resource person, Dr. Jatin Srivastav, an associate professor at EW Scripps School of Journalism at Ohio University, to the 12th session on day 4 of the Faculty Development Program organized by the School of Mass Communication, KIIT University. Dr. Srivastav's teaching experience ranges from graduate seminars in mass communication theory and research methods to undergraduate courses on graphic design and media literacy. He is passionate about the role of information in democracies and how it may relate to how societies evolve and function. He is deeply involved with developing and teaching courses such as information literacy, introduction of mass communication and race, gender, and class in media, which are focused on increasing media literacy among students. Dr. Srivastav's recent research is rooted in theory-based exploration of the new media environment. He is also extremely interested in issues related to interactions between media and society in India and has worked on book chapters and research articles exploring issues related to new media and health communication in the Indian environment. His research has appeared in international journals such as Computer and Human Behavior, Communication Review, Journal of Health Communication, Communication Research, Human Communication Research, and Telematics and Informatics. He has also presented his research at various international conferences organized by AEJMC, NCA in US, and ICA. Dr. Srivastav has been involved with the International Communication Division at Association for Education in Journalism and Mass Communications since 2013. He has served as the research chair and vice chair for division and is currently serving as the division head. He directs the Digital Media and Human Behavior Laboratory at the School of Journalism and is currently a member of the Council for Research, Scholarship, and Creative Activity at Ohio University. Dr. Srivastav has been actively involved in a range of international initiatives. He has been conducting workshops and seminars focusing on faculty and program development in India. He has served as the research coordinator for SUSI, an international media training program focused on increasing awareness about media systems and practices in the US, and has also co-directed an academic conference in India. I have observed during the last couple of years that there are very few Indian origin academicians staying abroad or contributing to strengthen the discipline in India. One of them is Dr. Srivastav. When I requested Dr. Srivastav, immediately he agreed to contribute as a research person, maybe without knowing me or my affiliation. Thank you, Dr. Srivastav, for accepting our invitation. I welcome you on behalf of the School of Mass Communication, KIIT University. Dr. Srivastav will talk using theory as a guide to explore the role of media in our society. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. It's good to be here. It's always great to attend events in India and to be a part of especially faculty development events in India. I see many known faces, and it's very reassuring. It's very nice to see you all here. Thank you very much for having me. I would also like to thank the administration, the dean. I don't know how the administrative structure is at KIIT, but anyone who was involved for involving me in this event. So today we are going to talk about something that I find very interesting, or that became a part of a lot of my academic life in United States, and that was thinking theoretically or approaching theory in a way so that it becomes a part of your thinking. A lot of times when we think about theories as something that is in a book, or we say things like, it's just a theory. So that essentially means that it's just a theory. So this cannot be true kind of situation. So a lot of those things, but very simply understood. And I think this benefits us a lot as professionals and as academicians outside the scope of academic publishing, even in our everyday lives, if we have a better understanding of how theories work, and more specifically, the theoretical mindset, a mindset that helps you think about things in a very rational manner, where you try to explain things before jumping to conclusions, or before saying things like media is so powerful, or media is always biased, or violent media makes people violent, therefore it should be censored, or whatever you show in the movies is going to shape the society or change the society or make people think a certain way, therefore government should take actions to censor content on movies. Now, all those ideas can be thought about in a very theoretical manner. A lot of times we think about them very emotionally. For example, when we talk about media being powerful, what do we mean by something being powerful? Or when we talk about media being biased, or a politician being biased. Now, a politician is supposed to have a bias, right? But media is expected to be neutral, and therefore, now I don't know what neutral is, okay? But in our public perception, we expect media to be neutral, and therefore, when those expectations are not met, we use the term bias. But what is bias in those situations? So good theories or a theoretical mindset focuses on explaining things. And when you are able to explain things, you are able to predict things. So, for example, in natural sciences and let's say biology and physics, a lot of time you explain things. So, for example, we have been seeing a lot of discussion about how vaccines work. Okay, so that's the explanation part. Okay, and when vaccines work, when we understand, when it makes sense to us that this is how vaccine works, we as public are able to accept them as a reasoned alternative, or the same understanding can be used to create newer vaccines for the same disease or for a different disease, right? So if you remember the stuff you read in high school or intermediate, I don't know where you read it. I think I read it in class 8th about how the first vaccine, the Chechak or the smallpox and chickenpox vaccines were created. Okay, that is the theoretical idea, that you create antibodies, and then so that has been one of the strongest theoretical relationship, and that has been used So once that was explained, this is how this thing works, you could take it to many other diseases. And so when you come to social sciences and media related research, very similar kind of ideas come into play when thinking about theories. So for example, you say that certain kind of political campaigns work. Okay, why do they work? What kind of messages were there? Factors within the messages? Were there factors within the audience? Were there factors within the party or the people who were being promoted that made these campaigns effective? If you can explain it, because remember, you cannot run the same campaign in the next election year. The issues will be different, maybe people will be different, all those things. So if you could understand why those succeeded, then next time you are going to create a campaign, you have a system which you can use to create better campaigns with an increased likelihood of success, right? In our understanding of different aspects related to media, this works pretty much in a relatively similar manner. So when we say, are people influenced by media? Okay. Now, if you say, does violent content, does watching movies which are very violent, which have a lot of violence, does that influence children? Okay. And you look at it and you think about it theoretically. Now, if you're watching a movie that has a very, let's say, Tiger Shroff, he seems to be the more violent star of our times. Okay, action star. There was a time when Amitabh Bachchan and Dharmendra used to do those things. So you say, all right, so we can explain why if kids watch Tiger Shroff movies, they may or may not be influenced in a certain way. Okay, the same understanding you can take then to another movie, let's say of another star, or a movie which doesn't have human characters. Okay, so like animation characters. So if a Tiger Shroff movie is making people violent, can we take the same understanding and apply it to something like Tom and Jerry? A lot of people might be very uncomfortable showing their kids movies with human stars, but they might be perfectly fine showing them cartoon characters or cartoon movies which have a lot of animated violence. Okay, so again, if you explain, then it's easier to predict. Okay. Similarly, learning, persuasion, a lot of these areas. Okay. So now in our everyday life, a lot of times we do apply theoretical ideas. Okay. So for example, if I'm driving through New York City, or when I get to my home city, Lucknow, in Lucknow, I would say, so if I have to go to market, okay, I would probably, and I'm taking my father's a scooter. Then sometimes I try to avoid to go out at 3 o'clock or 7 o'clock, because around 5 to 6 o'clock, I understand that there are a lot of people who are just out of office and the traffic increases. Okay. Now that's a theoretical understanding. Now that's something that I can apply, that applies if it's Monday, Tuesday, if it's December, January, whenever, but it may not apply in weekend. Okay. If I go to Mumbai or Bhubaneswar, it might apply a similar way. So there are peak hours. So my understanding of the situation that there are fixed patterns in which people go to office and then come out on streets or come back home may influence my decision making, and that may actually help me in my real life, right? So we do use theoretical ideas, theories, not always very formal, in how we approach our lives. A lot of times, if we are able to do so, if we are able to think theoretically, that may make our lives easier and make some decisions more effective. So, for example, in the example I talked about, it may make easier for you to go from my place to the market or to any other place I'm trying to go. So thinking theoretically becomes a very, very important thing. It makes things effective. It is important because it helps you predict situations, and when you are able to predict situations, when you are able to anticipate, you are able to respond better to things. Now, one very interesting thing with theories is that they are falsifiable. So if you find if you find that a theory is not supported, or if there is enough evidence that the theory doesn't work, then you say that the theory doesn't work. Okay? And that's a very important thing. A lot of times when we look at issues related to faith, for example, or issues related to culture where people are very emotional, where you say that this thing works all the time. Or, for example, there have been a lot of remedies, okay, for COVID-19 since the time it started. I come to know about them on WhatsApp from my relatives, from my mother, from a lot of people. So people who told me that if you take, I don't know if you know what kapoor is, that's camphor. So, you put them in the aartis in temples. So if you take kapoor and ilaichi is cardamom. So they say if you take kapoor and ilaichi with you all time, you won't get COVID. Okay, and that was something that was very prominent during the early days of COVID. Now, it was not tested. So there are ideas that were tested. So there is a difference between the vaccine, between the medical science, and between the ilaichi and kapoor. Okay. One was tested, and it was very clear that if a vaccine fails in the test, or if a medicine fails in the test, it will be discontinued. It will not be used. However, the same thing was not applicable to kapoor and ilaichi. Okay. So it's the falsifiability. So if it doesn't work, we will throw that idea away. We will not continue with it. It's a very simple idea. Okay. And that's where the difference between emotions and logic comes. That's where the difference between faith and science comes. Both are very important in their own place, but there is a difference, and we have to be very aware of the difference. So when so with all that out of the way, let me talk about let's talk about some situations. Okay. One thing I would like to talk about is how we think about the power of the media. A lot of times when we say media is powerful, a theoretician from a theoretical mindset, if you're coming at it, you would say, but what is power? What do you mean by power? How do you look at it? And the second thing I would like to talk about, if we have that much time, is what is bias. So when you say, what is bias? I talk to people all the time, and my family is a very conservative family. I grew up in Uttar Pradesh, in Lucknow. So a lot of times our families, or at least my family, is very divided when it comes to media consumption or how they look at media. And I believe that in India, everyone thinks that they know more than any media researcher that has ever been there. Okay. So anything they would not agree with, or anything my father, especially, he doesn't like, he would say, they are all biased. Okay. And then you are at a point where you really find it hard. So two things: power of media and bias. But as I'm doing this, it would be very helpful if I understand how you think about it. Okay, so we have a chat window, and we would like to use it effectively. So let's start with the power of the media idea. Okay, so when we talk about media, how powerful do you think it is? And what do you think power means? So let's take around 1 minute. And if you have the energy, and if you can hear me, please type in a short response. Don't worry about grammar. Don't worry about anything else. If you want to use the WhatsApp language, use the WhatsApp language. I understand many of the abbreviations. And I understand 2 languages, Hindi and English. So anything you are comfortable with, type it in there. So let's take 2 minutes, and I will wait for your response. Okay.
Sir, if I may.
Yes.
Hello, sir. Thank you for your very insightful talk on theories and trying to understand them. So I would say how powerful media is. Well, I think it's what water is to a fish. Like when we are living in this world in a digital society, we can't really escape. For example, the conference that we're having right now, or maybe afterwards when I'll be talking to a friend of mine, etc. We can't really escape it. So there is information that the media is sending out into our head continuously, and which is empowering us and at the same time making us dysfunctional as well, maybe at the same time. Because too much information also makes us dysfunctional, right? I mean, the narcotizing dysfunction, as we know the effect that it has. So I think it's too powerful even to be called powerful for that matter.
Thank you, Shoptik. Now, can you test that? So it might happen that you have a lot of media around you, but you are really not affected by the media. You make your own choices, or media messages don't really influence you. So even though media is everywhere, is it really powerful if it has no control over you? So, for example, let's say my parents used to say, well, for a very long time, and they still say that sometimes, that my children never listen to us. Okay, even when we were at home, 13, 14 years old, me and my sister was younger. So we were, in a setting where our parents had the whole controls. They were feeding us, they were doing everything, they were paying for everything that we were doing. Wherever we were going was most of the time because of their, with their permission. Now, in that situation, they still complained that they had no influence over us. We would go to school, we'll meet our friends, we won't tell them a lot of things. Now, in that situation, the dynamics is that, well, the environment is powerful, it is everywhere, but the individual in it is not actually responding to the environment very well, or is not actually guided by the environment all the time. So if the individual is more powerful than the environment, and it can select when to get out of the environment, would you still call it powerful?
Sir, I think to respond to that, I think the dress that I'm wearing, the way I'm talking, that's the influence we are talking about. So when we are essentially talking about power, it's not about making me do certain things in a certain way, voluntarily, but involuntarily doing it. So I think that is much more intuitive in me, for that matter. The slangs that I use, or maybe the dress, the food that I eat when I go to a restaurant, etc. So it's all affecting down on me. So it's kind of the pressure on me, which I don't realize, and I function that way. It's the cultural imperialization through the digital form that you can highlight. So that's what my opinion is, maybe.
Thanks, Shoptik. So remember, one thing which we do with the theory, or when we are thinking theoretically, is that we try to that we try to explain things. We try to be specific. So, for example, in this case, we try to be specific about what we mean by power. Okay. Now, if you look at different media theories, so there have been different perspectives, different theoretical ideas, and I see feedback from Anurag ji, Pranta, and Saurav, Jyotiranjan, and Dr. Shah. All right, so most of it is kind of resonating the idea that media is powerful, and a lot of it relates to the perception that media shapes public opinions. Okay. Now let's look at how theory or how different media theories have thought about it. Okay. Now remember, this has been a very central question to media research. Okay. This has been as central as the Jeev and Maya dichotomy in Indian philosophy, or or what happens after people die, those kind of things. So this is one of the biggest questions that you have. Okay. So one of the perspectives, and the understanding changed with time, or understanding was modified with time, and there are different ideas, different theoretical streams of thought, very similar to discussions in Indian philosophy about Jeev and Maya. There are different ways of coming at it, and different people believe the different things. And in certain situations, certain ideas seem to be more prominent. In certain situations, certain other ideas. Okay. So one of the ideas was the magic bullet theory, okay, or the magic bullet perspective, or the hypodermic needle perspective, which essentially said that the power of media is seen as its ability to influence. Okay. So messages from media, when they meet people or when they hit people, okay, because it's a very, if you look at the words magic bullet, so it's like a magical bullet. When it hits people, it affects them right away. Hypodermic needle, it's like an injection. You don't even know and you get affected, under your skin. It mixes in your bloodstream, and it moves through your body. So it's very instantaneous in its effect. Okay. So the idea there was that messages instantaneously affect people, and people have no control over how they are affected. So if you are injected something, then you have no say in whether you are going to get affected or not, right? So that's one situation. So when you look at power, you see the assumption of very high degree of power in the media or media messages, and relatively weaker audience. Because when you are thinking about the power dynamics, it is the relationship between the sender and the receiver. Okay. If the receiver doesn't get affected, then then you really don't have much power, right? So it's like now there. So remember, one of the things was that if a theory is falsified, if there is cumulative evidence against a particular perspective, then that particular perspective over a period of time goes out of picture. Okay. On the other hand, if findings of a certain theory, or if a certain theory is tested in different situations, in different regions, at different time, among different samples, using different samples, and you find similar findings, then you say that the theory has been generalized to a pretty good degree. It's a reasonable theory which works very well across situations. Okay. So, for example, if you were thinking about, let's say, Kapoor and Ilaichi thing, okay, and you tested its effectiveness in Lucknow, and people would say, and it worked, and you would say, it works on people in Lucknow, and it works on people in Lucknow, and then someone would say, but in Kerala, the weather is different. People eat different things. There are different lifestyles. would it work there? And you use it there and it works there too. Okay. Then you go to Rajasthan and it works there. You go to Bhubaneswar and it works there too. And then you say, there is a good degree of evidence that it works across, populations. Remember with the vaccines, especially with the AstraZeneca vaccine, one of the earlier criticisms was that it has been tested on people who have been mostly outside India. So would it work on Indian people the same way? Would the problems it might cause be same or similar? Okay. So again, the generalization idea. Okay. So if findings are replicated, okay, then the theory becomes strong. If findings are false, if findings are not replicated, if the evidence doesn't support the theory, then the theories goes out of fashion, or it decreases in its influence. Okay. So with Magic Bullet, what happened? It went out of practice in most places. One of the early hits to Magic Bullet was the two-step flow idea. Okay, so there was this, and this is an older theory. People's Choice Study 1940. So there was this district in United States. There was this town in United States where the results of the elections always, for last 40-50 years in 1940, always reflected the results of national election. So for example, in India, it's more complicated because we don't vote for the president or prime minister. But it would be like, so let's say there's a town, Bhubaneswar, and there is a constituency in Bhubaneswar where a particular party, if it wins the Lok Sabha election, that party makes the government in the center. Okay, so they said that this town, Erie County, Sandusky in Erie County, reflected the population structure in United States, and they did a study there, and they asked people, how do you make voting decisions? And they find that they were assuming, based on the prevalent knowledge, that media would have a very strong influence. Everyone would say that we directly listen to media, or we directly watch media, and or read media and make our decisions. But they started finding that a lot of people were actually giving other people the credit for shaping their election decision. Okay. So they say, we talk to other people. So there were a good number of people who were talking to other people. Okay. So if you have to challenge, the Magic Bullet theory, that was seen as something that was a counter evidence. So you say, if media was so powerful, then people really didn't need to, talk to other people. Okay. But they said that they were talking to other people to make their decision. It means that there was some other player too in the whole mix. Okay. And so that is another perspective. Then comes another perspective, and this is a very interesting perspective, and that is more applicable to our time actually. So think about this. We are living in a time where we select what we watch or listen to or read. Okay, most of the time, you have hundreds of channels, if not hundreds, tens of channels. On internet, you have unlimited number of websites accessible to you. You go and put in the URL. You go and type Facebook. You go and click on a link, and then you watch it. Okay. So you are making choice. On television, if you don't select a channel, how would you, no one can force you to watch that channel. Unless you are at a situation where your parents or your wife really like to watch a channel, and they can force you, of course. But we are kind of taking that out of the equation. So in that situation, you say, all right, so people really have a lot of power, and they select what they watch or what they consume. Then how can we say that media is that powerful? So there is the uses and gratifications kind of perspective, which say that audience is active and they are selecting content. So there are different perspectives. There is another very interesting thing that is happening these days, and that's the idea of selective attention, where media, at least in the larger democracies, is so polarized, especially as most media has become commercial, that so for example, in the United States, there are news channels which focus on the conservative news. There are news channels which focus on what you call liberal news. In India, I think that's happening. News channels are more divided based on the politics, on the kind of politics or ideology they support. And people like to watch what reinforces their point of view. So that's the idea of selective exposure. So humans are very, humans are creatures of habit. Humans like to do things that are aligned with their belief systems, their ideas. So there comes the selective attention, where you are saying that, it's people who are making choices. A lot of time, even the content they are viewing, in a story, they are selecting those elements which confirm their own biases. Okay. So now you have all this range of ideas. One range of ideas says that media might be really powerful and humans have no choice. The other side of the spectrum says that people actually make a lot of choices, especially in the era of the internet. So as you go through these, you start thinking about the influence of media differently. There also comes the ideas like cultivation and social learning, which talk about, and I think Shautik was talking about it, which talk about learning from media. So you are going to watch something, whatever you are going to watch, you will learn from it. So things like fashion, things like behaviors, aggressive behaviors, or even things like things which no one talks about, and that puts a different spin to it. So I grew up in India, and I'm from a very conservative family. No one told me about how to perform romantic relationships. Okay, how do you know how to propose? Like, see, proposing was not something that our parents ever did. At least my parents didn't do, and their parents didn't, So how did we learn? And I'm assuming that we, at least, even if we didn't actually do it, we at least dreamt of doing it, and that's a very big thing in Indian society. So you dream of doing it, even if you don't do it. So at least in my generation, so we, so how do you learn? Anyone remembers when Valentine's Day started? Valentine's Day didn't start, when I was young, there was no Valentine's Day. If 14th February was a Tuesday, you would go and offer laddus, you will go and read Hanuman Chalisa and offer laddus. Okay. So, but how did it start? How did you realize that diamond was the thing to give to your partners? Hira hai sada ke liye. How did we learn this? Our parents never told us. They didn't teach us in our schools. So there is learning from media, social learning. But the thing is that, yes, we did learn that part. But let's say we support a political party and there is news against that political party. We really don't, take that into account. So, for example, you say, I don't believe in this, and me and my father, we have this conflict quite often. So I say, so what are these leaders doing, or what is happening to this or that? And they will say that, I don't care about this. These media people are lying, or or the other way things. See, you watch those things. So you are influenced by certain things, and you are not influenced by certain things. So you still have the choice. So who has the power? So essentially, now remember, answers are not that clear. Okay, they vary with situations. things like romantic behavior, which no one talked to us about. We learned, a certain way. Things about other kind of behavior. Which no one talked about. A lot of times you learned from media. There was a lot of behavior that you learned, but then you figured out that it didn't work in real life that way. So for example, think about this. If you find that someone is being unfair to you, okay, and you're watching, in movies, actors like Dharmendra, shouting, "Kutte, main tera khoon pi jaunga." How many times have you done that in your classroom or in your school, or in your real life? I remember that one of my classmates once did that, "Kutte, main tera khoon pi jaunga" in the class at a very young age. But but most of us have not done that. So we know what to do, what not to do, and so we are making choices. So essentially, when you go to theories, you start thinking about power. What do we mean by power? What do we mean by learning? How is it different? Who has the choice? Who are the players in the field? And that, I think, is a very important aspect. So theories, even when you are not writing a paper, theories make you think. Theories make you understand. Theories make you, explain the world in a way so that you can communicate it to others. So that you don't say, so you tell someone this is what's happening. And with and you say this is how it is happening, not that you shouldn't, so for example, sometimes when I fight with my grandfather or my father, my mother would say, "Keh rahe na, maan lo." So he's saying it, listen to him. So you should accept it just because he's an elder. So when you understand theories, you have better ways of communicating. You have better ways of explaining. Okay, so that's one part. Okay, so that's the power of the media thing. Now let's talk a bit about any thoughts you might have. So what do you think about all this discussion? Because a lot of it is just saying that theories basically expose you to different ways of thinking about things, and sometimes different ways of communicating things. And sometimes you go deeper and say, what does this actually mean? Now, any thoughts you might have before we start talking about the media bias situation? Please feel free to switch on your mic and talk about it, or to post your response in the chat window. All right. So that part is done. Let's take another example. What do we mean by media bias? Do you think media is biased? What do you think about bias? Do you think media is allowed to be biased? If you can prove bias, would you stop consuming a particular media? Do you think it is possible to be without bias? How do you define bias?
When there is no neutrality, right? When we say that there is no neutrality, then we call it bias. Either this side or that side, not at the middle.
Thank you, sir. So, but what is neutrality then? We are fighting words with words. But what is neutrality then? How do we understand neutrality? And remember, in India is a very crazy place, because in the United States you have just two sides. Okay, so you have, let's say you are looking at things politically, and you have the Democrats and the Republicans, and some really tiny, independents that have no say in anything. But in India, you have it just gets crazy. So you have the Samajwadi. So if I'm talking about you, Samajwadi, Bahujan Samajwadi, BJP.
We have hundreds of wings.
Yeah. So which side? So sometimes you don't even know what all sides are there. Then there are the religions, there are the communities, there are the languages. So how do we define neutral? So we say, how do you define neutral? It's neutral is without bias. How do you define bias? Bias that is not neutral. So it's like, chicken and egg kind of thing.
Still, I can say that so far as if you are reporting fact, what exactly has happened when you are writing it, that is purely neutral neutral presentation. The moment you add your views to the news, to the content, then it obviously it becomes biased, because my views is always not same as your views, right? We will definitely differ in our personal views. So the moment I make as a content producer or as a content creator, when I create the content and I add my views there in the content with the fact, then immediately that becomes biased content for you.
Thank you, sir.
Because you are not reading my opinion piece. You are reading the news, right? And when I'm writing my opinion piece, yes, that is my view. You consider it as my view.
All right, sir. So you are saying?
Sorry. May I butt in?
Yes, sir. Please.
Yes, sir. Please, sir. Please, sir.
Then what are facts? What are facts then? Are they sacrosanct?
Well,
facts are almost always fabricated.
All right. So
one more thing, sir, I would like to add in this. Actually, one of the editor of largest circulated Odia daily, Sambad, I don't know, perhaps you are knowing about it. The editor once he told that every paper is biased. Even he admits that our newspaper is a biased one. We are biased. We are biased for the downtrodden people, for the poor people, who generally raise the voice. I can say we are giving the voice to the voiceless. So we never say that we are neutral. We are biased. So I think this is another kind of perception to the term bias.
Sir,
adding to what Anurag just said, that it's all about being subjective. No, we all are subjective, and there's nothing called objective. We cannot just be objective with our frames of references and with all the exposures that we have had. And it's very difficult to be objective. So all our content, everything will be subjective.
Exactly.
So
sir, I think
fact and all these things are not sacrosanct.
Thank you, Patraji.
Catch-22 situation. We probably critique bias more than we critique anything else, but at the same time, we love reading the editorial and the op-ed page more than probably the rest of the newspaper at the same time, right? So if we just place facts on the table, then probably that takes the performance away to some extent. And we, all of us, we do love performance, most of us, if not all of us at least. So I think it's a catch-22 situation, even if we beat up bias, but we can't do without it either at the same time.
All right. Thank you, Shoptiji. And thank you everyone for your inputs. And remember, this is a very, very important discussion. Bias, I think it origins, the origin of the term is French, and it just means tilted. Okay. Now, if you don't know what a straight is, and so if you don't have idea of what is straight, then you don't know what is tilted. So like Mr. Patra was saying, it's the reference point. So there has been a lot of discussion about it in different terms. So in India, I see this happening a lot, where they say, so now we are talking about media, that is, and let's say we agree that facts are facts, and we are talking about media that publishes only facts, and that's completely factual. Now, if media is completely factual, is there no scope for being biased? I hear this thing all the time, that you are showing this news, but you are not showing that news. You are showing this, but you are not showing this. So now you are coming not to the content, but to the selection. right? And selection bias is something that, like, so content bias, where you say the facts are being modified, okay? Or you are not reporting facts. So when we are talking about news, we are assuming that everything is fact-based, okay? But if everything is fact-based, is there some scope for bias? How do we think about bias? So there are media theories that talk about that get into that. The thing is that media is, well, it's an organization, so it has resources. So you are looking at organizations which have limited resources, limited number of reporters, limited space if it's print media, limited space to publish things, or limited time to present things. Okay? So you cannot go after all the stories that are possible. You cannot broadcast or telecast all the stories that are possible. So there are choices being made. How are those choices made? As people who talk about objectivity, you would understand that if different news organizations, all well-meaning one, if given the time, so when they select stories, very well-meaning one, nothing corrupt, they come up with different stories that they want to tell their people. How do things get different? If there was this golden line, of objectivity, of absolute truth, then all well-meaning ones would fall on that line. Everyone would be telling the same truth, but they don't. So what do we make of it? Is bias, like, what do we understand by bias? So that's one thing that comes up very often, and in media. So one thing I'm saying is that we are not getting into the facts debate now. We are saying, all right, so the fact-based bias is there, but we are assuming that if there is a news entity that is publishing something that they verifiably know is not fact, then we wouldn't call that news. Okay? So we are saying, all right, so let's assume everyone is publishing fact and everything, all that. Now, besides that, are there other venues for bias? So one thing is that you will have to select things. So out of, let's say, thousands of stories that are possible, you select certain stories. Okay? Out of those stories which are possible, you select certain stories to go on the front page, certain stories to go in the back. So for example, you say, this was such a good story, you sent it on the second page. You gave it just one column space. You gave the story a picture. You gave the story a bigger headline. So that again could be seen as bias. Okay. Then the story, the words you use, the way you frame a story, that might also influence how the idea is perceived. Okay. So let's talk about some theories. Now, before we do that, any thoughts about the idea of selection, or the idea of bias being an ingrained part of the process? You cannot bring out a newspaper if you do not select, if you do not prioritize certain news stories. That's the description of the editorial job. So what some would call bias, the other would call judgment.
Even bias is also judgment. Even bias is also judgment. Skewed, tilted, or otherwise, it is also judgment. Like say, in my initial days, I was looking up to the public relations of the university, and whenever there was an event, there would be a chief guest from outside, and there would be my vice chancellor, and I always had this dilemma: whose name to put first, whose name to put in the headline. that was always, obviously the chief guest would be somebody of a higher this thing, but my chairperson, my director wanted the VC's name to be put in the way. That's again a selection bias, and you are faced with those biases all through. And then we try and use our whatever buddhi and whatever thing that we have, if you can use those things, words in here, and to do a good job at it. That's all I can say. It can never be completely objective.
So as Mr. Patra was saying, you have to make a choice, and any choice you make means that you are not making the other choice. So if he puts the vice chancellor first, then people will say, oh, this was the big guest, and you put the vice chancellor first. Then you put the vice chancellor first, vice chancellor. No, why did you put the vice chancellor second? So that thing is always going. So think about it. So this is a part of the process. So think about this. Let's say because remember, this example has something very important to do, and I'll keep it really short. So a housewife goes to the market and selects vegetables. Different housewives. Now the housewife cares about her family and her children and everything, but she brings certain vegetables out of all the vegetables that are possible to get. Okay? She cooks certain dishes. So different housewives go to market and they bring home different vegetables. Okay? Now they cook them differently. Now the child might say, so there is a child who really likes to eat potatoes all the time, but his mother cooks palak or spinach all the time. Now the child might say that, why did you make that choice? You are a biased person. You could have gotten the potatoes, but you got the palak. But you don't say that because you understand that that's a part of the process. Now for the mother, there are a lot of factors that are there. Health conditions of the family members, how much money you have, maybe you are planning to go out during the weekend, so you want to put palak today so that you can have samosas during the weekend, or jalebi and all those things. So even a well-meaning mother will make these choices. Okay? The choices, if the choices are not there, the household cannot function. Kids won't eat. So if the mother is thinking and making all the choices, like evaluating all the choices, the kids won't get anything to eat. Okay? If the editor gets mired into that thing, he or she would not be able to publish a paper or bring out a broadcast. Okay? So there was there's this theory called gatekeeping theory, and there are other theories, and I won't talk about them, but gatekeeping, agenda setting, framing, priming, which look at how choices are made and how people evaluate those choices. Okay, but today I will talk only about gatekeeping. So, around Second World War, there was this in United States. They were finding that there was a shortage of meat. So United States is a prominently meat-eating country. So there was a shortage of meat, but they realized that some cuts of meat were selling. There was more demand for some kind of meat cuts and not for others. So if they, if they slaughter an animal, there were some parts which stayed there in the markets and went back. There were some parts which had high demand. Okay? And so they started thinking that if we could change how mothers are making selections about what to put on their tables, okay? And they started, how they started realizing that it was the mothers who were making these choices. Okay? And then they said, all right, so what kind of choices they are making? And so they used the idea that, mothers are gatekeepers in terms of food, in terms of what comes into the house. They are making the choices. So messages or communication messages should be targeted at mothers promoting other kind of meat or other kind of food options. Okay? Now, there was, similar idea was later applied to news environments. So where so there's this, so in this newspaper, this guy went and he asked, he observed the editor and called him Mr. Gates. So a lot of stories were coming to the editor, or story ideas. And he said that every idea you reject, you write that on a chit and, and keep it separate. Okay. And so at the end, they could look at all the stories that went in or that were published and all the ideas that were rejected. Okay. And then did a study of what kind of values or what kind of ideas are getting accepted, or how is the gatekeeper or the editor in this particular case making his decision in this case. So so in this situation, they come up with a list of factors. Okay, so some factors are like immediacy, something that happens right now. So let's say a breaking news story, or urgency, or is it relevant to our population? So for example, if I'm in United States, maybe if there's a story about hikes in petrol prices in my city compared to hikes in petrol prices in Bhubaneswar, I would probably put the petrol prices in my city because it's relevant to my people. It's going to affect their lives compared to the one in Bhubaneswar. So a lot of those factors. And that's the idea behind gatekeeping. So the idea is that prioritizing is going to happen. People are going to make choices. Now, some choices may be problematic. In what cases choices may be problematic? And I think that's the right discussion to have. So for example, if an editor publishes or does not publish a story because an advertiser asks him or her to publish a story or to hold a story back, that might be an issue. So then you start getting into this. All right, so bias is a part of the whole thing. Certain kind of biases cannot be avoided because they are part of the process. So we have to think about what kind of biases, and we have to get deeper into it. And that is something that's again relatively subjective. So some kind of biases may be okay with me, but may not be okay with you. So in this situation, gatekeeping theory kind of takes you deeper into the whole thing. All right, so this is 1 hour, 1 minute, and I will stop here. Any questions, anything you want to talk about if we have time? Okay. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, sir. I request all the participants who ask these questions, they can type down the same in the chat box, or they can unmute themselves and ask the questions forward.
Sir, if I may.
Yes, please.
Yes, you are able.
I don't
Please.
have a question, but I have a comment, which I think probably reflects my understanding on the topic of bias. Maybe is that I'll just cite an example. Like in early 1970s, during the Vietnam War, towards the end of the Vietnam War, rather. So one of the most you can see in the US, working for CBS, Walter Cronkite, very highly a person who was known for his unbiased presentation per se. So I remember watching a video of him where he took his glasses off and he looked into the camera and said that I think that America should pull out of the war. And in reference to that, you can say the entire protest against the war probably was fueled by the media to a great degree, be it print or be it television, to a great degree. And I feel bias in that regard is probably a tool. It depends on how we use it. It absolutely depends on how we use it, to what degree we use it, etc. So maybe there we can have regulations or maybe gatekeeping on that front, but it itself is a tool and probably something we cannot get rid of. Probably.
Yes, thank you, Shoptik. Good observation. Now, I would say that Cronkite, so in United States, bias and balance and fairness, these have been converted into labels which you can sell, rather than really getting into what they actually mean. And I believe that in India, that is going to happen. And that is already happening, where channels say, we are the fastest, we are the clearest, we are the balanced ones. So I see that happening in India, where these very complicated concepts are put into a box and marketed as Maggie, I would say. You know? So for example, in United States, Fox News with cable, they use the term fair and balanced and so on. Objectivity is something which is hard to get, but objectivity becomes a tool of the trade, a term that people use. They say this person is objective, this news channel is objective, and so on. Okay. There is this discussion I was having with one of my colleagues, a very he's retired now, a very renowned professor, a long career in journalism, in print journalism, a very prominent media economist, Dr. Hugh Martin. So I was talking to Hugh, and we were talking about the same thing. And Hugh said that, what happened that it's. So I'm paraphrasing him, but the idea was that in United States, the early media was relatively partisan, and there were a lot of reasons. So late 1800s, early 1900s, there were a lot of reasons which, so like yellow journalism, a lot of other stuff, where like, which kind of lost them a lot of credibility, and especially when your television and radio starts competing with them towards mid 1900s and so on. And he says that one of the things that happened was that to get to a wider audience, to say that we are not like the old media, or we are not like them, or we are not like, we are not what we were, what media was like 15-20 years ago, and to cater to the increasing middle class. And that's something that is happening in India too. They started going to the middle. They started, because remember, the cable TV was not yet there. So cable was going to do a very different thing, but these were broadcast channels which were going to reach everyone pretty much the same way Doordarshan used to in 1980s, when I was young, I would say younger, So objectivity becomes more of a marketing choice, whereas in United States, like as the cable came, it became very clear that because people were subscribing, so subscription cable, and I'm talking about subscription cable, not basic cable. There were players that took their niches, that focused on their own markets and stuck with them. So Fox News, they have certain kind of audience, and they do conservative news. MSNBC, on the other hand, does certain kind of news. In India, I believe that the same kind of extremes, maybe you can think about NDTV and Republic channel, if you are looking at television. So yeah, so objectivity becomes a very complicated situation. With Walter Cronkite, he was a very respected person, a very respected journalist, but I think he was respected because he could, cover stories, or he could talk about things that the power did not like. So in United States, they like to make heroes out of their journalists. So they say, all right, so truth to the power. So it's like our, Amitabh Bachchan, angry young man. So all the bad things will happen, and then one day he will, start beating people. So those kind of things. So I think the hero worship aspect, or the celebrity aspect, that some journalists attained, and Walter Cronkite was one of the early ones, along with Edward Murrow. So yeah, I hope that kind of gives you the answer, Mr. Patra.
Thank you. So, like you said, the subject, this thing, bias and all these things, subjectivity, objectivity, have become labels. What is being practiced these days is advocacy, as I understand it. And just to give you an example from a very different field, but which was very much played on in the media recently, was Cristiano Ronaldo, pushing away the bottles of Coca-Cola and then pulling a bottle of water and telling "Agua, agua," and those again maybe tokenism and all, but then those kind of decisions, those kind of choices require a whole lot of guts. That's what I feel, and a strength of character. Only then you can be objective if you want to be in whatever your frame of reference is. If you want to be objective, then you have to have very strong in your character, and you have to have a lot of guts. That's my take on it. Thank you for this information.
Thank you so much, sir. It was such an interesting topic and open-ended. I can say involved all the participants involved in this process of discussion. We can say. Actually, we are really interested to take more questions and to extend the discussion, but due to shortage of time, we would like to end that session over here. And now I'd like to request my colleague Sophie Garai to work with the vote of thanks. Handing over to Sophie, please.
Thank you so much, Anurag sir. Well, a graceful and warm evening to one and all present. It's my privilege to propose a vote of thanks on the third session of day 4 of Faculty Development Program organized by School of Mass Communication at KIIT University. COVID-19, well, as we know, it has taken the world by storm. And today's session specifically, presented by Dr. Jatin Srivastav sir, Associate Professor and Director, Institute of International Journalism, E.W. Scripps School of Journalism, Ohio University, Athens, talked on the topic using theory as a guide to explore the role of media in our society, has thrown valuable light on understanding theories and how they help us understand the world around us better through a critical and useful lens. It did raise a lot of important and interesting questions to ponder over. It was quite an introspective discussion. I, Shobhte Gorai, on behalf of School of Mass Communication and the entire fraternity of KIIT deemed to be university, extend my most sincere thanks to Dr. Jatin Srivastav sir, Honorable Founder of KIIT and KISS, Professor Hrishikesh Mohanty, Vice Chancellor of KIIT deemed University, Dr. Sushmita Samant, the Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor Gyanaranjan Mohanty, the Registrar of KIIT deemed University. On my behalf, I extend a very hearty vote of thanks to Professor Himanshu Shekhar Khatwa, the CEO of School of Film, Fashion and Mass Communication Schools. I thank all the participants for gracing this event and sharing with us your questions, your valuable inputs on the relevant theme. I thank Dr. Anurag Sahu, the Assistant Professor at School of Mass Communication, for moderating the session. Last but not the least, I extend my hearty thanks to Dr. Vidubhushan Das, the Post Coordinator of School of Mass Communication. With that, I conclude my vote of thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.